What if everything you believed was a lie while someone made money from it? These con artists didn't just cheat the system, they rewrote reality and fooled the world. Gregor MacGregor, the man who invented a country. Our first story is about a man whose ambition and charm were matched only by how good he was at lying. Gregor MacGregor was a Scottish Highlander, obsessed with uniforms and medals, and he built a reputation in the British Army before chasing glory in Venezuela's War of Independence. During his time in South America, he promoted himself into becoming a general. Then, he eventually came across the harsh Mosquito Coast with swamps and jungle that would be known as Honduras and Nicaragua today. And from the local Mosquito King, Gregor secured 8 million acres of wilderness. But what he did with it would go down as one of the most outrageous scams in history. Once he returned to London, he expressed himself as His Serene Highness Gregor I, Cazique of Poitiers, a nation he completely made up. On top of that, Gregor realized that post-Napoleonic London was a city teeming with people whose lives were uprooted by war and hungry for new opportunities, particularly in the booming market of South American investments. And at that moment, Gregor knew exactly how to play them. He opened a Poitiers office in London, unveiled a flag and anthem, and told newspapers about a paradise with fertile soil, rivers glistening with gold, and a thriving capital called St. Joseph. But the real kicker? A 350-page guidebook under the fake name Captain Thomas Strangeways. It supposedly featured a grand cathedral, a parliament building, a national bank, and even an opera house. It was pure fiction, but written with so much detail it convinced even skeptics. So investors rushed in, buying £200,000 in bonds and land certificates at 4 shillings an acre. Gregor had farmers, doctors, lawyers, basically everyone who all believed they were securing their future. But what they didn't know was they were walking straight into a death trap. In 1822, 250 settlers boarded ships bound for Poitiers. But when they arrived, the dream was shattered. They found nothing described in the guidebook. Instead, they found an isolated swamp infested by wildlife, surrounded by a massive jungle. For months, the settlers huddled in makeshift shelters that became ruined by malaria, yellow fever, starvation, and other diseases. And then before a rescue party showed up, over 150 people had died. The scam rocked London, but Gregor fled to France and tried it again, where he was eventually caught in the scam and arrested. But with his charm and shifting blame to his associates, he was found not guilty. And here's the craziest part. Gregor later returned to Venezuela, where he was celebrated as a hero, and died in 1845 buried with full honors, never once punished for the hundreds of lives destroyed by his imaginary nation. Anna Sorokin, the fake heiress. She convinced New York's elite that she was a millionaire heiress and almost got away with it. In 2013, Anna Sorokin appeared in Manhattan under the name Anna Delvey. She claimed she was a German heiress with a €60 million trust fund, and she played the role flawlessly. But in reality, Anna was Russian-born, raised in a middle-class family where her father drove trucks, and she had been fascinated by luxury and status from a young age. So how did she turn that background into a ticket to New York's high society? For 4 years, Anna built a life out of lies. She lived in boutique hotels like 11 Howard and the Beekman, handing out $100 tips while dodging payments on her own rooms. She hosted expensive dinners, wore designer clothes, and moved through New York's elite circles with the calm confidence of someone who truly belonged. But the higher she climbed, the bigger her lie had to become. Her biggest project was the Anna Delvey Foundation, a private members club and arts foundation she wanted to establish inside a historic Manhattan building. If she pulled it off, she could cement herself as a true power player. To make it work, she relied on constant stalling and deception. She forged financial statements, created fake wire confirmations, and invented a business manager to vouch for her. She even tricked City National Bank into giving her a $100,000 advance, which she burned through in a single month. But her biggest downfall came on a trip she couldn't afford to take. Her scam peaked during a luxury trip to Morocco, where she invited friends on an all-expenses-paid getaway, then stuck them with a $62,000 bill. By 2017, the illusion collapsed. She was arrested in an undercover sting. In 2019, she was convicted of grand larceny and theft of services, sentenced to up to 12 years in prison, leaving behind a legacy built entirely on illusion. In the end, Anna finally got the fame she always wanted, just not the way she imagined. Now, while Anna impressed the high society of Manhattan, some con artists found a different way to scam people without meeting them face to face. Meet Ramon Abbas, the Instagram scammer. In the world of social media, no one projected an image of wealth like Ramon Abbas, better known as Hushpuppi, to millions of Instagram followers. He was the billionaire Gucci master, flaunting private jets, multiple Rolls-Royces, and endless designer shopping sprees. He claimed to be a successful real estate developer, but behind the filters, his real business was much darker. Hushpuppi was a master of business email compromise, which was a complex scam where criminals hacked corporate emails to intercept and redirect big financial transfers. They also tricked people into sending them money or sensitive information by pretending to be a trusted person in a company. And the scale of his crimes would shock even the FBI. He attempted to steal over $100 million from an English Premier League club. He helped North Korean hackers launder $14.7 million from a Maltese bank. He tricked a New York law firm into wiring $1 million to his associates, and even defrauded a Qatari businessman who thought he was funding a children's school. Meanwhile, as he used his Instagram to promote himself where he bragged about his riches, later became the tool that helped bring him down. With every flex and flashy post, the FBI was quietly tracking his every move. And then came the raid. In June 2020, Operation Fox Hunt 2 was launched. At midnight, Dubai police and the FBI stormed his luxury Palazzo Versace apartment. They seized $41 million in cash, 13 luxury cars, and hard drives with data from thousands of victims. Ramon was extradited to the US, where he pled guilty to laundering millions through BEC scams and other cybercrimes. Investigators revealed that in just 18 months, he had tried to move over $300 million. In 2022, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison and ordered to repay $1.7 million. And in the end, Hushpuppi's story became an unsettling reality of how the illusion of influencer fame can hide a criminal empire. Victor Lustig, the man who sold the Eiffel Tower. Yes, this was real, and it all started with a fake title and a very real weakness in Paris itself. In 1925, Paris was still recovering from World War I. The Eiffel Tower was just 35 years old, and at the time, many considered it an ugly, temporary structure that cost too much to maintain. A newspaper article even highlighted complaints about its maintenance costs. But for Victor Lustig, who was a smooth-talking con artist fluent in several languages, this was the opportunity of a lifetime. He created government credentials, naming himself Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Posts and Telegraphs. Then he invited a small group of scrap metal dealers to a secret meeting at one of Paris's most exclusive hotels, the opulent Hôtel de Crillon. But why the secrecy? He told them it was because he had to dismantle the Eiffel Tower. In that luxury suite, Victor explained how the government had been facing a massive amount of maintenance costs and public pressure. So the tower would be scrapped and the metal sold to the highest bidder. To prove his pitch even further, he gave the dealers a tour of the tower itself, and from there, they were hooked. But Victor already had a dealer in mind, André Poisson, who was an insecure dealer desperate for status. In a private conversation, he hinted how he was underpaid for his job and suggested that a little incentive might guarantee the deal. André took the bait, paying 1.2 million francs, about $3.77 million today, plus a cash bribe of 70,000 francs, equaling $11,970, which today is equal to $219,700. And once Victor had the money, it was game over. He immediately hopped on a train to Vienna with a suitcase full of cash. Now humiliated, André chose to stay silent, but it was that silence that gave Victor enough confidence to return a month later and try the scam again. But this time, a dealer tipped off the police, forcing Victor to flee to the US. And even there, he launched a counterfeiting operation. He even tried to finesse the infamous gangster Al Capone, convincing him to invest $50,000, but gave it back 2 months later. Impressed with Victor's apparent honesty, Al Capone ended up giving Victor $5,000 for his troubles, which, crazy enough, was Victor's game plan the whole time. But in 1935, his luck ran out. Victor was finally arrested, and well, to everyone's surprise, he escaped from the federal house of detention in New York the day before his trial by making a rope from bed sheets. But 27 days later in Pittsburgh, Victor was recaptured and sentenced to 20 years in the notorious Alcatraz prison, where he ended up dying of pneumonia in 1947. So far, we've discussed fake countries, identities, personas, and opportunities. But what about someone who created an entire company that would change the world and help countless lives? This is the story of Elizabeth Holmes, the Silicon Valley prodigy. She was once hailed as the next Steve Jobs. But how did a college dropout build a $9 billion empire on a device that never worked? In 2003, Elizabeth dropped out of Stanford to found Theranos. This was a health tech company promising to revolutionize blood testing, and her invention, the Edison, was said to run hundreds of medical tests from cholesterol, genetics, even cancer screening, only using just a few drops of blood. It sounded almost too good to be true. To sell the dream, Elizabeth strategically built a personal brand. She wore black turtlenecks like her idol Steve Jobs, spoke in a deep baritone voice, and promised a future where healthcare was fast, cheap, and life-saving. And Silicon Valley was desperate to believe her. She put a board together of well-known people that included former secretaries of state George Shultz and Henry Kissinger. She landed covers on Fortune and Forbes. Investors from Rupert Murdoch to the Walton family poured in over $700 million. At its peak, Theranos was valued at $9 billion, and Elizabeth was a paper billionaire. But there was one massive problem. The Edison didn't work. Behind the marketing and demos, the machine was wildly inaccurate, only capable of a handful of tests. To cover this up, Theranos staged fake demonstrations, playing pre-recorded results to make the Edison look functional. For actual patients, the company secretly used traditional Siemens machines, diluting blood samples, making results even less accurate. At this point, the lies were catching up. Whistleblowers inside Theranos finally broke their silence, taking their story to Wall Street Journal reporter John Carreyrou. And despite intimidation and threats from Theranos' top lawyers, he exposed everything in 2015. By 2022, Elizabeth was convicted of defrauding investors and sentenced to 11 years in prison. Bernie Madoff, the Wall Street legend. While Elizabeth Holmes sold a vision of the future, Bernie Madoff sold something far more essential: trust. For decades, Bernie wasn't just a player on Wall Street, he was Wall Street. A former chairman of NASDAQ, he was respected, admired, and considered a financial genius. His legitimate trading firm was massive, which made the perfect cover for the real operation happening in secret, the largest Ponzi scheme in history. And the wild part? It fooled almost everyone for decades. Through his wealth management fund, Bernie promised steady, consistent returns no matter the market. His clients included celebrities, billionaires, global banks, and major charities. Having access to his fund wasn't just investing, it became a status symbol, showing that you had made it. People begged to give him money, but behind the scenes, Bernie never invested a dime. The fancy-sounding split-strike conversion strategy he promoted was completely made up. All of the client money went to one checking account at the Chase Manhattan Bank, which is JP Morgan Chase today. And when investors asked for withdrawals, Bernie paid them using new investors' money. And to keep everything looking legit for his investors, the monthly statements showing steady growth were completely made up. So how did no one catch on? His reputation was untouchable. Even financial experts were baffled by his returns, but too afraid to question him publicly. But eventually, one investigator started to push back. Harry Markopolos knew something was off and repeatedly told the SEC that Bernie's results were mathematically impossible, yet regulators ignored him. But when the global financial crisis came in 2008, Bernie's clients wanted their money back. At first, it was just a few withdrawals, but eventually, it snowballed so big where people were asking for $7 billion. But the money wasn't there. The one bank account that was supposed to hold billions was almost empty. With no way out, Bernie confessed to his sons and they were horrified. Shortly after they turned their father in, the investigation revealed one of the biggest frauds in history. Investigators found client statements that showed $65 billion in assets was a complete lie. Bernie was sentenced to 150 years in prison where he eventually died. His Ponzi scheme officially ran for 17 years, but many believe the deception may have started decades earlier, making his fraud even darker than we'll ever know. Now, if you thought that Bernie's scam was next level, he didn't invent the idea himself. In fact, it's far from anything new. Let's go back to the con artist this specific type of conning was named after. Meet Charles Ponzi, the original schemer. His name became so legendary that it's now the official term for the very scam he perfected, the Ponzi scheme. But how did an Italian immigrant pull off one of the most infamous financial frauds in history? Charles Ponzi arrived in Boston with little money but plenty of charm and ambition. In 1919, he discovered a loophole in the international postal system, the International Reply Coupon, or IRC. After World War I, currency exchange rates were chaotic. Ponzi realized that IRCs bought cheaply in countries with weak economies could be redeemed in the US for stamps worth far more. In theory, this meant massive profits. By January 1920, he launched the Securities Exchange Company, promising investors a 50% return in 45 days or 100% in 90. Compared to the typical 5% annual return, this sounded unbelievable. But because it was tied to a real loophole, people bought in anyway. The initial pitch was the idea of buying low in one country and selling high in another using the IRCs, making his scam that much more convincing because, in reality, it did have some truth to it. But that's not the way Charles handled it. The first investors were paid exactly as promised. Word spread quickly. Soon, people mortgaged their homes and poured in their life savings. What they didn't know was that their profits weren't coming from postage at all. They were being paid with the money of newer investors. At his peak, Ponzi was celebrated as a financial genius, making up to $250,000 a day, which is roughly $4 million today. He lived a life of full luxury, buying a fancy mansion, custom cars, and high-end clothes. But one question would eventually expose everything. Clarence Barron, who was the publisher of the Wall Street Journal, calculated that in order for Charles Ponzi's scheme to be legitimate, it would require 160 million IRCs in circulation. But in reality, only 27,000 existed. The math proved impossible. In August 1920, Charles' empire collapsed. He owed millions. He was bankrupt, ruined thousands of lives, and even caused banks to fail. The man who had been celebrated as a hero was now a villain. As a result, Charles Ponzi was convicted of mail fraud and spent 14 years in prison, forever making his name famous in the world of financial crime. His scheme ran for just over 200 days, but left a legacy that still defines financial fraud to this day. Frank Abagnale Jr., the Great Impostor. He lived a life of bold impersonations and masterful counterfeits. He was a pilot, a doctor, and even a lawyer, all before he turned 21. But the craziest part was that he wasn't even licensed for any of it. You probably know his story from the movie Catch Me If You Can. But the real story is even wilder. It began in the 1960s. As a teenager devastated by his parents' divorce, Frank ran away from home. But how would a 16-year-old survive on his own? For Frank, the answer came in a uniform. His first great con was as a Pan Am pilot. He bluffed his way into getting a uniform, forged an FAA license, and for 2 years, deadheaded on over 250 flights, traveling to 26 countries, living in luxury hotels, and never once flew a plane. He always just went along for the ride and nobody asked questions, letting the real pilots do all the work. But when the pressure grew, Frank switched roles. So he moved on as a doctor in Georgia. As Dr. Frank Connors, chief resident pediatrician, he relied on interns to do the medical work, claiming confusion whenever questions got too technical. But even that wasn't his boldest act. He forged a Harvard law transcript and passed the Louisiana bar exam on his third try, despite never finishing high school. For 8 months, he worked in the Attorney General's office. But eventually, he ran into a Harvard-educated colleague who started to ask him direct questions about the university, which, if you can guess at this point, forced Frank to make his exit once again. But here's the biggest kicker in Frank's story. All of this was funded by check fraud. Frank pioneered check washing, where he erased the original details on a check, like the payee's name or the amount, and then replaced them with new information to steal money, all while living out his fake identities. By 1969, he was one of the FBI's most wanted. Eventually caught in France, he served time across Europe and the US until the FBI made him a deal. Use his skills to catch fraudsters. Of all the con artists we've covered in this video, Frank was the only one who flipped the script, turning his crimes into a career helping law enforcement. If you liked this video, subscribe for similar ones or leave a comment to suggest another.